Hey everybody, and welcome back to episode 2 of This Week on WoW Twitter, a series that I'm trialing where basically I go through the deep dark depths of WoW Twitter. I doom scroll and I find the most interesting conversations, the most interesting topics that have been affecting the community, and then I make a little video about it, and we get to discuss it. So you don't have to doom scroll Twitter, I'm doing it for you. Please don't go there, it's a terrible place. And this week we've had quite a few good, solid conversations, a few heavy hitters. So Scripe, who raid leads for Echo, he had a clip taken from his stream where he basically was saying about how Aberris, the most recent raid tier in which Echo lost to Liquid were able to take the top spot. Scripe says that this raid tier was unacceptable. Unacceptable. And that he's going to be reaching out to Blizzard to have a conversation with them about raid tiers going forward. Which is very, very interesting. We can kind of touch on that in itself. The fact that he's going to reach out to Blizzard and he's going to say, you know, how's that conversation going to go? Hey, Blizz, make a longer raid tier. And Blizz goes, nah. You'll play it anyway. I don't really know how that conversation goes, but I do know that these guilds do have access to representatives at Blizzard, and they are able to kind of have a little bit of a two-way conversation there, which is nice, which is good. It's healthy for that to be the case, but yeah, Scripe's definitely not happy with how this raid tier went. There was only about 3 days, he says, of actual mythic progression. The other stuff was heroic splits and normal splits, and all the prep work that they have to do. Remember, it's not just whilst the raid is active, it's all the prep work that they have to do in the lead-up. They have to farm millions of gold, they have to scout their players and trial their raiders, and they have to, you know, figure out who's playing what and gearing this character and gearing that character. They have to get their analysts, they have to plan events, because remember, they do these live events, they have to secure sponsors, they need to know the dates that these events are going to take place on. You got to say to your sponsors, hey, we can get you 7 days of content, or, oh, actually, sorry, it was only 2 days, because this was a quick race, you know? It's become quite a big thing. I know this is a community event and only affects a handful of guilds, but it has become quite a big thing. So it does beg the question of how these raid tiers should go, how long they should be. So I think it is an interesting conversation for Scripe to bring up. However, I don't think it really affects the vast majority of the player base. And I do think, like, this is a conversation that you shouldn't be having with Blizzard. This is a conversation you should be having with Liquid and Method and, like, whoever else is in those top spots that are really gonna have any kind of competition. When we look at it, these guilds, Liquid, Echo, and Method coming into the fray now, they're clearing these bosses, these raids so quickly, so efficiently, so surgically, that other guilds are just way, way behind. So even if they took their foot off the gas a little bit and made things like universal, they have some kind of agreements, like, right, we're not going to do this, or we're limited, right, we can only do 3 splits each. You know, take your pick. That kind of thing, then maybe the raid tier would be a little bit less work required for Scripe and the players, and they'd get more of a reward in comparison. Because this is something that Scripe was actually asked by Franck. As many of you probably know Franck in the community. He said, what is a proper tier? Sepulchre and Vault, there were 3-ish bosses that were released where they were basically unkillable, right? You think of things like Anduin and Halandris was really tough, right? These bosses that have been nerfed and nerfed and nerfed over time. And Scripe said, it used to be that raid tiers were 7 to 12 days long. That was common. He said a proper tier is one where the effort you put in versus time spent progressing makes sense. And I can relate to that. You put in all this work for only a couple days of prog. It doesn't really seem fulfilling. You want a good, you know, good week, maybe 10 days that you really want to be progging on. So I can get that. But I do think this is a discussion that these guilds need to have amongst themselves rather than a Blizzard deal, because it's not a Blizzard product. At the end of the day, this is a community event. You guys invent the rules. It's up to you how you want to do it. And that brings me to my next point that I wanted to discuss, which is actually the state of the average guild that is progressing in Mythic right now. Because you look at these Race to World First guilds who are clearing the raid tiers in a couple days, going, oh, this is too easy, we want it longer, we want it harder. But then you look at the average guild, and it's not the case. It's actually maybe the opposite. Where even though Aberris has been a very achievable raid tier, and it seems like the level of tuning has been quite comfortable, we still have a situation where over 600 guilds are stuck on Mythic Skarn, which is boss 6, I believe, of 9. Some of these guilds are doing 100 to 150 pulls, and some of them are even going above 250 for this boss. And it just shows that you have the Race to World First guys who are blasting through these things and going, it needs to be harder, but for these average players, the level of difficulty is actually probably quite comfortable, and actually maybe even could look to be nerfed a little bit. I know it's Mythic, and I know it's supposed to be really, really challenging, but at the end of the day, you make a massive amount of, you put a massive amount of development time into a piece of content, you want a lot of your player base to go through it. And, you know, if you really want to go extreme mode on Mythic, that's fine, but make it not drop gear, and make it kind of like Final Fantasy, where you have these boss fights, these ultimates, where it's just like for pure prestige and ego, and you kind of get maybe a little transmog to say, hey, you did this. But do something like that, and then the average player can go through Mythic and get the gear and actually play the game with the gear. And the next topic I wanted to talk to you guys about is a clip from Xaryu's stream of him saying that streamers should be told when Blizzard are going to release patches ahead of time, as long as they are willing to sign an NDA. And I'm smiling as I tell you this because of how much outrage the community would have if streamers got special privilege. But Xaryu commented on the tweet and even mentioned, like, this was 80% him messing around, but it would, you know, be great in an ideal world sort of thing. And I see where he's coming from, you know, if you're a streamer and you want to be there for the content and this is your livelihood and everything, it would be really nice to know ahead of time so you can book holidays and you can book time off and this and that, schedule things, and just know a little bit ahead of time when your main bulk of content is going to be happening, when tournaments might be happening, that kind of stuff. It's very, very helpful as a streamer. And ultimately, like it or not, streamers, YouTubers, content creators, they are marketing tools for these companies these days. Games want streamers to market their product for them. So they will give out codes, they will give out, you know, game editions and all that kind of stuff because they want to market their product. So it makes sense to tell people ahead of time when these things are going to come out. And to some degree, this does already happen. You know, these Race to World First teams that are organizing these in-person events and other such things, YouTubers, like, how did they make a video on this? And it only just, you know, we only just found out, but they've already got a video uploaded within an hour? Like, what's going on? Because some of these creators are told, or at least inferred, some kind of information as to what is coming and when. So there is a rough idea for some of these creators. But I think it would be a good idea in some regard. I mean, I know for me personally, I've missed the last two Race to World First because I booked holidays on the times when the races were. So I guess I should just book another holiday and then I'll know when the next race is and then everyone can copy. Yeah, just my luck, unfortunately. The whole signing the NDA thing, I mean, we just know those don't work. People can leak information way too easily, especially, let's say you give it to 100 creators. It's too easy to track, or too difficult to track who would have leaked what. And the last topic that I wanted to talk to you about today is a tweet from Scarizard, who is actually a WoW developer, works a lot on the gearing process and itemization, made some very, very good trinkets over their years being on the WoW team. And they put out a tweet saying, I've got a question for you, WoW Twitter. What are folks' biggest issues and pain points with itemization and gearing in WoW, with the caveat of you can't mention acquisition? So that's an interesting one, obviously excluding anything about acquisition then and how you're actually getting access to these pieces of gear. There's been quite a lot of discussion across PvPers and PvEers alike, a lot of people weighing in on this conversation. A lot of things for a lot of people seem to be around the actual stat weightings of things. Stats either being not important enough or too important or not being able to get good distributions of gear. So, for example, people were saying about how secondary stats for some specs just have absolutely like no value or a super low value to the point where you really don't want them. Like Mastery for Survival Hunter, for example, you really don't want it. And how other stats have a consistently a high value for a lot of specs and how maybe that could be addressed. Also, there's things like the weighting of secondary stats and how valuable they can be, where you can get a piece of gear that's higher item level than something, but it doesn't have your best stats on, so it's kind of dead for you. That doesn't really feel good, and I think that there's probably a fine balance where a piece of gear should generally be an upgrade if it's in higher item level, but at the same time, you don't just want to blindly equip high item level and just say that'll be the end of it. So I think there's a nice middle ground there for that. Some people calling for reforging to come back. Reforging would be a very interesting one. A lot of people either love it, hate it, or have no idea what the hell what it is because they're WoW Zoomers. But that's definitely an interesting one. I personally would like to see just more interesting gear in general. You know, you get excited about trinkets and weapons, but other than that, you normally don't really care too much about like items. Oh, is this gonna be mastery haste or is it gonna be crit mastery? Whoa, you know, it's not really super interesting. It's a bit bland for me, and I get it. It's a lot easier to balance things, but in my opinion, I'd love to see more of like a classic era thing. Not necessarily like hit chance and expertise, but just more more variety in what actual stats you're trying to get a hold of. And also things like, you'd have wacky items in Classic. You'd have things that were like, I mean, strength and intellect. And you're like, who's using this? I don't necessarily think we need to go that extreme, but just sometimes you get items that were like 95% of a stat weight and then 5% of a different thing. You don't really get that now. Normally it's about like a 60-40 or a 70-30, and it's kind of like roughly like that for stats at the moment. And that'll about do it for today on This Week on WoW Twitter. Again, make sure you hit me in the DMs on Twitter or Discord or whatever you want. If you have any interesting topics for next week's episode, let me know. I'm all ears.